IO Legends. Today we are going to dive into a little reaction. As you guys know, I'm a big retro gamer, especially when it comes down to Pokemon. And I found a video that says how Pokemon Red and Blue were made. So now we're going to dive into it. And here we go. How Pokemon Red and Blue were made. As I said before, right? Huge part of my childhood, basically. And yeah, we're gonna give it a shot, right? Let's dive into it. How Pokemon Red and Blue were made. I'm kind of curious, right? I think we all kind of know the origin of the Pokemon story, but what about the games? So let's have a look.
The origin of the first generation of Pokémon games is a fascinating tale that involves real-life bug catching, trademark difficulties, almost losing years of work, and defying the expectations of Nintendo, who didn't understand the concept of collecting monsters. To get the full picture, we have to go all the way back to the 70s.
It's actually weird, right? When you consider that one of the biggest franchises right now in terms of catching monsters is claimed to not understand how you actually catch monsters, right? It's wild.
When a child named Satoshi Tajiri developed a fascination with catching and collecting insects in a western Tokyo suburb called Mashida, where Satoshi grew up. He enjoyed exploring the rural parts, such as rice fields, rivers, and forests. On his adventures, Satoshi searched for insects, fish, and other creatures.
Satoshi, right? Here's the hint for you guys. Yeah, Satoshi Nakamoto. Huh? Maybe it was Pokemon all over. Think about it.
There was something about the way they moved that mesmerized him. He studied all the creatures he brought home and thought of new ideas of how to catch them. For example, most of the other kids would catch beetles using honey, but Satoshi had the idea of putting a stone under a tree, because beetles sleep during the day and they like sleeping under stones. It made finding them a breeze, and as a result, Satoshi would collect more bugs than all of his friends. Little discoveries like that excited him each and every time. His bug catching skills also earned him the nickname Dr. Bug among the neighboring kids. Aside from exploring his neighborhood, Satoshi was also fascinated with Ultraman on TV and in manga. He stated in an interview with Time magazine that if games didn't exist, he would probably...
Damn, Ultraman? Like, Ultraman is OG stuff. Like, for real. If you've never seen that, give it a shot on YouTube. Maybe we even watch it afterwards, right? Like, who knows? But crazy good. Should we put off the subtitles, by the way? Don't really need that, right?
Probably be making anime. Satoshi also frequented the local arcade hall starting around 1978 and became hooked on Space Invaders, which got him more interested in video games. Back then there was barely any games media, at least not where Satoshi lived. Therefore, he took reins into his own hands and created Game Freak magazine in 1983, around the time he started going to college. The magazine was completely handwritten and stapled together by Satoshi himself.
Yo, this is fire. This is somehow like Web3 stuff, right? Like doing stuff on your own, getting started, making it completely like hand drawn everything, and then expand from there. Somehow Web3 spirit, right?
It featured secret tips and tricks on how to beat arcade games and was available in specialist bookstores for 200 yen. The most popular issue managed to sell over 10,000 copies, so at a pretty young age, Satoshi already had a real business going. One of the people that bought the magazine was none other than Ken Sugimori, who would become the primary character designer and art director for Pokémon. Ken enjoyed reading the magazine and got in touch with Satoshi to offer his services as an illustrator. From then on, the pair collaborated on Game Freak magazine until it was discontinued. They quickly became friends and bonded over their love of arcade games. One day, Ken and Satoshi talked about how arcade games are often very similar and asked themselves what they would do differently if given the opportunity to develop a video game.
So that is actually interesting, right? Because if you think about the fact that gaming consoles and games was something that was just starting at the time, right? And Pokemon was, I would say, kind of late compared to other games, right? If you think about like NES and SNES and whatever, it's like it was already kind of late. It's still fascinating though that like the origin of all that stuff was back in like, retro arcade games like Pac-Man, Crazy, right?
The other people reading the fan-made magazine were programmers and had access to game development tools. Pretty soon I had some contributors and we'd all get together and talk about games. The more I learned about games, the more frustrated I became because the games weren't very good. I could
Welcome to Web 3, right?
tell a good game from a bad game. My conclusion was, let's make our own games. By the time Game Freak started developing games, Satoshi's neighborhood had completely changed. A place that was once rich with rivers and forests had now been replaced with housing facilities, office buildings, and stores. Satoshi thought about all the kids who were now unable to explore nature and collect its mysterious creatures. It was this line of thinking that sparked the initial idea for Pokémon. In the face of more and more urbanization, the young developer wanted to provide an opportunity for kids these days to feel that sensation of going on an adventure, exploring unknown locations, and discovering the local critters and creatures.
Yo, this is fire, right? Like, I think nobody ever thought about the fact, but it is somehow true. I think in a world where, everything is so fast moving and yeah, urbanization is something that takes place more and more and more, right? Nature also, the touch with nature somehow gets lost a little bit in the younger generation. That is true. Pokemon kind of brings you back out there, right? You're always like running around in nature fields, catching like weird creatures, basically, right? Out in forests and fields and deserts, whatever you can imagine. So it's like, yeah, bringing yourself back into nature, right? Something that I never thought about before. Crazy.
This, combined with his favorite activities such as playing video games and watching Ultraman, laid the groundwork for the first Pokémon games. However, his idea didn't completely click until he saw the original Game Boy in 1989. The link cable capabilities of Nintendo's first handheld console seemed like a perfect fit for Pokémon.
Ah, okay. So the concept was out there already quite some while ago, right? But they didn't have the console or the handheld available basically to to make this idea work the way it should be, right? Because trading and whatever was not possible on the very first consoles. So genius.
Satoshi visualized actual living organisms moving back and forth across the cable. Furthermore, once Satoshi saw the success of the Final Fantasy Legend, the very first RPG for the Game Boy, he was convinced that his idea for a monster collecting RPG was not only possible on the Game Boy, but that it was the only system that could bring his dream game to life.
Oh, so it was somehow not a copy, but it was somehow like Final Fantasy influences. Now that you think about it, it's actually right. Right. Also in Final Fantasy, you have your team of a couple of people, at least back in the days, in like the old school, like tactic Final Fantasies on the Game Boys. You had like, also your team of people with certain abilities, certain attacks. It was kind of the same like Pokemon, but just with people, right?
Soon after, Satoshi and Ken officially founded Game Freak as a video game studio, and development on Pokémon began in 1990. The team kicked things off by creating a concept pitch document that contained a lot of early designs.
Capsule monsters. Oh, geez, no, right? Capsule monsters was the initial design. There are also like images out there and like script concept pages out there about capsule monsters. Google capsule monsters, you're gonna find it.
Sketches, as well as how the game would work. Interestingly, it depicted quite a different version of the world of Pokémon, and this makes sense given that Satoshi and the other creators originally set out to make a more traditional RPG-like game. For starters, the project's original name was Capsule Monsters, inspired by both the popular Japanese capsule toys called Gashapon dispensed from vending machines and Ultraman's Capsule Kaiju. It's this latter inspiration, however, that got the team into trouble trying to trademark the name, and they eventually had to change it to Pocket Monsters, or Pokemon for short.
Oh, that is interesting though. Like, what did they say? What was the reason that they couldn't use it? Because of those capsule issues, or what? Because that was something that was traditional?
Capsule Monsters, inspired by both the popular Japanese capsule toys called Gashapon dispensed from vending machines and Ultraman's Capsule Kaiju.
Gashapon, by the way, is something that is, even until nowadays, super, super big in Japan. And also, I think, I have the feeling that comes also very much into like the the anime NFT side of things.
It's this latter inspiration, however, that got the team into trouble trying to trademark the name, and they eventually had to change it to Pocket Monsters, or Pokemon for short. A common RPG trope, checking into a hotel or inn, was detailed in the concept pitch. Of course, players can still go to a Pokemon Center in the final game and heal their Pokemon, but it doesn't offer a room for the player to rest in. Another clear difference from the final games are the shopkeepers. This drawing depicts the main character trying to buy a Lapras from a shopkeeper, who can
Oh, you could have sold Pokemon to shopkeepers? That would be wild.
be seen keeping Pokemon in cages. While there's an opportunity in the Gen 1 games to exchange Pokemons for tokens at Celadon City, it's certainly not possible in the Pokémarts. The document also features a charisma stat.
Oh, charisma stat? Alright. Game parameter that not yet widely known among Japanese audiences. Charisma is featured in the Wizardry series, but it seems like Japanese games have yet to make use of it. Naturally, Capsule Monsters also allows you to capture creatures live rather than defeating them in battle, as you've done it in RPGs up till now. Yo, but that came along with Pokemon Yellow, right? Pikachu had a certain like friend level or something like that. I remember that.
Being able to trade multiple Pokemon at once, and an
He agreed to trade one of his Fireflies for 2 of my Green Dragons.
emphasis on collecting items like you would Pokemon.
You will be engaged in collecting numbered capsule monsters and items.
Additionally, the included sketches show a talk option when facing a trainer.
What? Imagine if you could talk to a trainer. That would be fire. What is he going to tell me? Wild.
As well as the total amount of HP and TP each Pokemon has during battles. TP was probably a precursor for PP and most likely stood for technical points. The drawings also depict the ability to sell your Pokemon for gold.
Okay. Here's my call. I think that would be a dope mechanic. Which was evaporated somehow with like the nuggets and bunch of other things where you can make gold with it, right? But especially if you find like rare, I think we all had this experience, right? When you're out there and you're looking for a rare Pokemon and then you find it, then you caught it, and then a couple seconds later you might interact the Pokemon once more, right? And then you consider, oh fuck that, man, it's like a rare Pokemon. Should I catch it? I don't have anybody that I could trade that with, right? So doesn't really make sense. So you just fight it, right? If you could just catch it and sell it, that would be fire. Godzillante, by the way. Number 23, Godzillante.
The currency that was used before it was switched to yen. Not only that, it's likely that an early idea was to assign a gold value to each Pokemon, as well as an intelligence stat, as evident in this sketch. Surprisingly, the concept pitch also includes a female version of the protagonist.
Concept bitch? A what? Yo, guys, please.
That was used before it was switched to yen. Not only that, it's likely that an early idea was to assign a gold value to each Pokemon, as well as an intelligence stat, as evident in this sketch. Surprisingly, the concept pitch also
The concept pitch? I know it should be pitch, but yo, you display a female character and say concept bitch? Please.
includes a female version of the protagonist, something that was introduced for the first time in Pokémon Crystal. Speaking of the protagonist, an early idea was to let the player character participate in battles. The original player sprite
Crystal, by the way, a game I want to play. For real. Not gonna lie. Crystal is something that we're gonna take on.
can be seen holding a whip and has a tougher looking physique. At one time, the protagonist would fight as well, but then we asked ourselves, if you can fight on your own, what's the point
Of having Pokemon. Yeah, that's true.
having Pokemon? The fact that features such as buying Pokemon from shopkeepers and the player participating in battles were cut from the final game is also a result of the team deciding to treat Pokemon more like friends instead of pets. It was also around this time that Game Freak started to lean more towards the Pokemon collecting aspect and less towards creating a more traditional RPG. When we were writing the text for the Pokédex, we started talking about how fun it was to collect Pokémon. We felt the story about a boy traveling to fill up his Pokédex was more appropriate for modern times than a tale of a hero battling an evil villain.
True.
Early
But you still have like somehow the villain arc in there as well, right? With Team Rocket. So it seems like they stick to the original concept somehow as well, which is good, which I like, right? They branched out a little bit more to this like collector aspect and not using your character on your own. But you still have this villain arc, right, with Team Rocket in there. So smart move.
Sketch of the Kanto map can also be found inside the document and reveals early landmarks based on the real-life Kanto region in Japan. These landmarks were later reworked into locations such as a Pokemon Tower and Saffron City. Fun fact, Pallet Town is based on Satoshi's hometown Mashita.
What? Yo, this is crazy.
The Pokeball, referred to as Monster Capsule in the document, also looked quite differently from the final version. Its white and red colors are switched and the button is located on the bottom instead of the side of the ball. Based
The capsule is open and closed by a button on the back.
on the sketch, it's speculated an early idea might have been to shrink down Pokemon to fit inside their Pokeballs, instead of being absorbed by a beam of light. Ken Sugimori, who led the design team, and Atsuko Nishida started drawing loads of different Pokemon designs. Atsuko is actually the one who came up with the design for Pikachu, the 3 starter Pokemon, and many others.
I've seen a video about her, by the way, because she was also the person that designed the Gen 3, or the third evolution for Pikachu. What many people don't know is, let me show you this really quick. What many people don't know is that there was a third evolution, basically, of Pikachu existing back in the days, which was never released because also Atsuko Nishida, so the artist, right, thought that it was too creepy and too horrific for the purpose of like Pokemon. Pikachu third evolution. There we go. This is what it should have looked like. That would have been the third form. So this would have been the third form of Pikachu. But yeah, it got scrapped afterwards because they thought, okay, this is not fitting to a child's game. And then with the third evolution scale, they came up with Pichu, right? With the baby Pokemon, they kind of made it that way. In my opinion, not the smartest move, because this one here looks fire, right? And if you compare it to like nowadays Gen's Pokemon, maybe they should start to introduce that at a certain point, in my opinion, right? Pikachu is still one of the most sought after Pokemon basically until today, and yo, adding another scale of evolution to it would be fire. I don't know why they scrapped this forever, but yeah, looks dope. I like it. Back to the video.
Ken always finalized each design and drew every Pokemon in multiple angles to make it easier for his colleagues to get a good understanding of all the pocket monsters and render them the correct way.
Is this a...
Both artists...
Okay, so let's see. This is a Kangaskhan. Concept Kangaskhan. This is a concept Arcanine. This is a concept Gengar. This is a concept Scyther. What is that? What is that going to be? What is this? What is this nowadays? It looks like a fucking earthworm of Dune, right? But what Pokemon is this supposed to be nowadays? Weedle or Caterpie?
Kept sketching more and more Pokemon, a lot more than the 151 that ended up in the games. The concept document confirmed that over 200 different Pokemon were considered and were in various stages of...
Why didn't they give it to us? Over 200 Pokemon for the first gen? Yeah, for real, right? It looks like a Dune worm. I'm on your side here. But yo, look at that. Those are concepts that look fire, right? Like this little, like, I don't know, elk creature, whatever this is. This might have come back into the game later on with like Damphirplex. I don't know what the English version is, but Damphirplex. But yo, yo, I mean, this looks a little bit like a Nidoking, right? Down here to the left on the bottom left. But yo, why did you scrap those concepts? Those are fire. And those are actually like, Pokemon. Not the shit nowadays, like key rings and garbage bags and I don't know. Or Rehorn. True. It could also be a Rehorn. Or maybe even a Rhydon, like the last evolution. Could be.
Of completion. Developers at Game Freak later confirmed in interviews that multiple Pokemon were indeed scrapped, and that the total number was reduced to their favorite 151.
No! Imagine if it would have had over 200 Pokemon on the first games. Fire!
Designs. This took a lot of effort according to Junichi Masuda, who worked on the original games as a composer, programmer and designer. To facilitate this and make sure everyone at Game Freak was happy with the designs, the studio organized popularity polls every so often where all the devs were able to provide suggestions and offer feedback.
Fire.
The general look
Web
of all
3,
Pokemon
right?
also went through some changes. At the start of development, most designs had a rather consistent look to them, often resembling dinosaur-like monsters. So it's no coincidence that the first 3 Pokemon ever designed were Rhydon, Clefairy and Lapras.
That is interesting. So it was Rhyhorn, Rhydon. Fire. Clefairy. The old version looks actually dope. More dope than nowadays version. But I see it because they wanted to get some, some kind of cuteness factor in it as well, right?
Lots of designs were also created with specific roles in mind, because early on, the devs envisioned Pokemon living alongside humans to help them with specific tasks.
Which is nowadays the case in new gens, right? And also the Pokemon series, basically, if we're honest.
Along the way, the developers discovered that battles were rather boring if there's only weak and strong Pokemon. It was clear they needed to introduce more variety in the designs and find a way to make battles more engaging. Therefore, types were introduced to the game's concept midway through development, and now...
Okay, so this was not even planned from the very first beginning, which is interesting. Very, very interesting. The idea, the concept behind it, right? Like, this is how Pokemon works nowadays. It's great. This was the origin story, and it was not even planned. Wild.
Now, the artists started to think about designs based on specific types such as water and fire. It simultaneously added some much needed strategy to the combat. Furthermore, it gave the team the idea to begin the player's journey by letting them choose a starter Pokemon that's either water, fire or grass type. An early drawing also showcases a Pokemon hatching from an egg, something that was later introduced in Pokemon Silver and Gold.
Fire mechanic, by the way. For real, fire mechanic. What I would have enjoyed more, though, this is something that I have to admit. What I would have enjoyed more, though, would have been something like cross breeding, right? Where you could create maybe your own Pokemon just by breeding 2 different types with each other's. Would have been smart. I'm talking way too much, I think, for that, but it should also be a good clip, right? So...
When all the 151 Pokemon designs were finished and approved, they started brainstorming about all the attack moves each Pokemon could use. There wasn't an initial plan of which Pokemon would receive which moves. Instead, the team came up with the moves separate from their Pokemon designs and then gradually assigned moves that would fit well with each Pokemon. Just this process of designing the Pokemon and their moveset alone took about 3 years to complete.
What? Okay, this is crazy. If you imagine, nowadays, I type that shit into ChatGPT, right? I get this within a couple of seconds, basically, from concept to gaming development, even coding, whatever you could imagine, right? Back in the days, they really had to put their work in when they wanted to create a game. For real. Crazy. 3 years to complete? Wild.
Nowadays, we're used to getting yearly Pokemon games, but Satoshi and his team were coming up with the popular formula of exploring mysterious areas, collecting Pokemon, and fighting your way through all the gyms for the first time ever. Additionally, the team back then was much smaller compared to the 150 plus employees working at Game Freak now. Junichi remembers how only 9 people worked on the original games. We could hardly even be called a company at the time. We were just almost like a college club or something, where people who were interested would just gather and hang out. They'd come to work whenever they want, leave whenever they want. Some people would be sleeping over because they worked so hard into the night. Something the team focused on from the very beginning was interactive communication. Most other developers were using the Game Boy's link cable to compete, but Satoshi saw it as a way to exchange data between players. While he likes competition too, he explained that the concept of one-on-one communication is very Japanese, and he wanted to translate that to a video game. Implementing trading would unfortunately become one of the most challenging aspects throughout development.
Oh, that's what I can imagine. That is somehow what we experience nowadays, right? When people explore some new shit on blockchain. It's like when you try a new concept that has never been tried before. Like here it was technically exchanging data, right? Before that, it was 2 players competing on 2 different screens on like the same game output. Here you had to switch stuff around on a gaming console that was very, very new, that was most likely not designed that way, right? So yeah, crazy. Really crazy. Shoutout. That's the reason why Pokemon is so big nowadays. Let's be honest, because they were like front running ideas and concepts that nobody else ever did before, right?
Since it was only possible to transfer tiny amounts of data between 2 Game Boys. Junichi admits that the technology just wasn't there yet, but Game Freak
just what I said, right? Tech wasn't ready actually.
Fought to make it happen anyway. A staple of Pokemon games is that every generation has at least 2 versions, but this idea actually didn't come from Game Freak themselves. The developers were thinking of how to make trading more attractive for players, but couldn't immediately come up with the right idea. When Satoshi went to Nintendo to talk about their progress, none other than the creator of Mario, Shigeru Miyamoto, suggested creating 2 separate cartridges.
Yo, this is crazy. So Mario and Pokemon somehow had a collaboration, in at least in terms of the concept idea. Wild. Something that I didn't know yet.
With exclusive Pokemon to catch, so people would be motivated to trade with each other. Rare and legendary Pokemon that are more difficult to catch were also included for the same reason. With an emphasis on interactive communication and shifting from treating Pokemon as friends instead of pets, it's no surprise that Satoshi explained that he's careful about violence in video games, which is why Pokemon faint rather than die. When a Pokemon runs out of HP, Satoshi was very careful in communicating to the player that the Pokemon is still alive, through the animation, the text on screen, and sound effects. I think that young people playing games have an abnormal concept about dying. They start to lose and say, "I'm dying." It's not right for kids to think about the concept of death that way. They need to treat death with more respect.
Shout out. Shout out Satoshi Tajiri. For real. So right. In general, I think we have to treat like games a little bit different, because this always comes with some kind of negative aspect to it, right? I'm dying. But it should be actually positive. So yeah, shout out to this guy, man, for real.
There was one extremely stressful moment during development that could have destroyed years of work, and perhaps even prevented Pokemon from ever releasing. The original games were developed on Unix computer stations that crashed fairly frequently, but the devs learned how to deal with it without ever losing important data. Except for one time after about 4 years of development, when they had to deal with a very bad crash. Nobody at the studio knew what to do, or how to recover the data that had all of the Pokemon, the main character, the map, and pretty much everything else that was created until that point.
What? Yo, imagine you are already used to this program, right? You're used to the Unix computering concept. You know that everything is going to crash. You do that shit for more than 4 years. You know how to secure the data. And then after 4 years, you make some rookie mistake where you kind of load in everything that you have and the system crashes. This is like the only, this is the only right? Like logical assumption here. This is crazy. What happened there? It was most likely somebody that was new to that concept and was like, okay, all right, let's do it. Right? And then boom, everything wasted and gone. Okay, now I'm curious. Did they have to start all over or did they kind of secure it somewhere?
Junichi recalls thinking that if they can't recover the files, they would be ruined.
Whoa, okay. Okay, that was The Apprentice, 100%.
After contacting the old company he used to work for, asking people online for help, and reading multiple books about the Unix machines, Junichi and the rest of the team eventually figured out how to recover the data. The soundtrack, sound effects, and Pokémon cries were all composed by Junichi. To accomplish this, he used his Commodore Amiga computer at home and converted his creations to the Game Boy with software he had written himself. With only 4 available sound channels to work with, Junichi had to get extra creative to compose a memorable and fitting soundtrack for the first Pokémon games, as well.
Wild, right? The amount of work and time, the creativity that gaming developers had to put in the like early 90s is crazy. Crazy.
Well as unique cries for each Pokémon. Near the end of development in 1996, the team started to get really worried about releasing their games on the Game Boy. The console was almost 7 years old at that point, and it was clear that, at least in Japan, the Game Boy was on a steep decline. It was so bad, in fact, that when the team talked to friends in the game industry, their friends would sound surprised and comment that it's probably not going to sell very well. Even Nintendo had its doubts about the project and didn't expect much from it. Earlier on in development, Satoshi was even told that Nintendo didn't really understand the concept of the game and the appeal of collecting monsters. Furthermore, there was a notion in the Japanese game industry that role-playing games created by a Japanese company may not sell well overseas, so Game Freak wasn't even thinking about releasing it outside of Japan at the time. It's safe to say that both Game Freak and Nintendo weren't expecting all that much from Satoshi's Pocket Monsters. Selling 1 million units, for example, would defy their wildest expectations. After 6 long years, Pokémon Red and Pokémon Green were finally finished and released on
Fascinating, by the way, really quick, that it was red and green, and around here it was red and blue, right?
February 27, 1996 in Japan. That day, the whole team went to different stores to see how the games were doing, and they could tell it was actually selling fairly well. Of course, without social media or the internet as we know it today, they didn't know if people were actually enjoying it, and what the exact numbers were for copies sold. Pretty soon, however, the developers saw deposits from Nintendo coming in, hinting Red and Green were selling even better than they expected. Not long after, newspaper articles were saying how Pokémon was becoming the new big thing with kids, and its popularity quickly started to accelerate from there. It wasn't until later when you started seeing, okay, there's going to be an animated series, oh, there's going to be a card game, now there's a manga weekly publication. When those things expanded into this multimedia thing in Japan, we really started to feel like, oh whoa, this is a big deal now. The overwhelming success of Red and Green gave Game Freak the opportunity to develop an improved version called Pokémon Blue, and was made available exclusively for subscribers of CoroCoro Comic in October 1996. It removed a number of bugs and featured graphical changes such as overhauled tile sets, new sprites for all the Pokémon, and more. Unsurprisingly,
Here's my call, though. The previous sprites look better. I mean, I don't know. Is it just me? Wait, one second. You don't see the Charmander and the Bulbasaur here, all right? Like, look at that, right? Like, those are the old versions, red and green. This is the blue version. And those are also the versions that got introduced then in red and blue, right? The overhaul version for European and US regions.
Blue was used as the basis for all the localized versions, and the American one is responsible for switching Pokémon Green with Pokémon Blue.
The US, once more.
Originally, it was kind of based on how people feel about and view different colors. The clearest split for us was between red and green, but when we started thinking about abroad, it was clear that wasn't the case. In America in particular, it's red and blue that are considered opposites, if you will. Localizing Pokémon
Okay.
was by far the biggest technical challenge Game Freak had to deal with, and this all came down to capacity. Squeezing all 151 Pokémon into the original games was already a difficult task, and they had to use clever techniques to make everything work on the cartridge. Unfortunately, the team discovered that English takes up more space than Japanese. Junichi admitted they hadn't really considered localization during development, so changing things like Pokemon names, the name entry screen and the Pokédex, which were all specifically designed in Japanese, was far more difficult and time-consuming than anticipated. Before the games would take America by storm, the animated Pokemon TV show was released weeks prior and proved to be a smart strategic move to get people excited about Pokemon as a universe. After 8 years since development officially began, Pokémon Red and Blue were finally released in North America, and soon in the rest of the world,
And I tell you, here it says that, right? Here it says that September 28th.
After 8 years since development officially began, Pokémon Red and Blue were finally released in North America.
September 28th, 1998, right? Released in North America. I don't know when it was released in Europe, but it was close after that because I got that to my birthday, basically, which is on November 17th, right? And I had Pokemon Blue as my very first game, very first console, very first everything. That was my introduction into gaming, for real. That was Pokemon. Pokemon was the start.
And soon in the rest of the world, turning Pokemon into a global unforeseen success. In 1997, it was already the best-selling game in Japan, surpassing even Final Fantasy VII
you're also
with
Scorpion?
3.65 million copies sold. The games duplicated that achievement in the United States in 1999 by selling 6.1 million copies.
Damn, I think at that time, that was actually crazy. I think nowadays that's somehow rookie numbers, but before the 2000s, selling over 6 million copies was big. Big.
Estimated total worldwide sales reached over 31 million copies for the first generation of Pokemon games alone. An important contributing factor for these numbers is the fact that lots of people were buying both versions available to them. What began as a way to motivate players to trade turned into an unexpected financial boost. Junichi Masuda recalls the ridiculous amount of product review requests of companies that wanted to make Pokemon merchandise once the games were available overseas. And while the games certainly generate a lot of money, even to this day, it's the merchandise that catapulted Pokemon to the highest grossing media franchise of all time. The
100%. 100%. 1 second.
global success of the anime also
100%. I'm not even surprised by that. Because I think they cover both sides, right? They cover the gaming segment and they also cover the usual merchandise like cartoon segment with those cute Pokemon, right? It's kind of tying into two different sets, if you could say it like that. Even nowadays, right? TCG and the games itself, like very, very successful when it comes down to like the older generation, like me or you most likely watching right now. But you know, this attraction level from the games or the merchandise or whatever is most likely going to come towards kids. So they covering two different age groups or two different generations, if you could say it like that, with one product. And this is genius. You won't achieve that with Hello Kitty, for example, right? Or Mickey Mouse or Winnie the Pooh. Hello Kitty, most likely even more. And I think this is also the reason that those numbers are a little bit higher than Winnie Pooh and Mickey Mouse, just because there is also a huge attraction towards a female audience, right? Not everyone, of course, but a bunch of them, which doesn't only tie to children, right? Compared to like Mickey Mouse and Winnie Pooh. So Mickey Mouse also a little bit less than Winnie Pooh, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Pokemon kind of covers everything. And this is, I think, the reason that they are so fucking successful.
also prompted Game Freak to create yet another version of the first generation of Pokemon games called
The yellow
Pokemon
one.
Yellow. It was made with the purpose to more closely resemble the TV show and featured elements like Pikachu as the only starter, your rival receiving Eevee, Team Rocket, and more. Game Freak learned invaluable lessons during those first 6 years of developing Red and Green, which were both very liberating and very challenging. Even though the studio had to work on other projects to keep the lights on, the initial freedom as a young company allowed them to not care about things like sales and investors, resulting in the team solely focusing on being as creative as possible and considering every single idea that came to mind. Despite numerous aspects potentially holding the original games back, it managed to thrive way beyond Game Freak's and Nintendo's expectations. Satoshi's original vision of exploration and monster collecting obviously struck a chord with both kids and adults, and continues to do so today. When you're a kid and you get your first bike, you want to go somewhere you've never been before. That's like Pokémon. Everybody shares the same experience, but everybody wants to take it someplace else. And you can do that. Receiving a bicycle as a present, catching bugs, and going fishing, I realized that all of these experiences that I felt were just mine were shared by all kids. I guess that's why people all around the world embraced it.
Yeah, I think we can definitely agree to that. Very, very good video as well. Really enjoyed this. There we go. ThatGuyGlen. Amazing stuff. Yeah, the origin of Pokemon Red and Blue, right? A little bit surprising how the concept actually worked back in the days and how it then got into what it is as we know it.